Hey squad, welcome back. Now today's video is all about preparing your music production project in readiness for transfer to another production location, whether it be another studio or you're sending it to another engineer or producer, or maybe you're preparing it to send off to a label or production house for them and their producers to work on. Now there are a few fundamental principles that you need to adhere to make sure your project opens up properly when it gets to the other side. And these are the things I'll be covering in this video today. Now the song I'm using to demonstrate is a track I released very recently called Promise. Now remember to check that out at ducebeats.com, as well as the rest of my tracks. I really do appreciate your support on that. Okay, well, let's get right into it. Okay, so we've got a very big production here. I mean, we've got quite a number of tracks. So this arrangement is quite involved. The way I generally lay things out, I've got my drums up here, I've got my bass lines along here, I've got my guitars here. Then I start bringing in keys, so pianos, and then synths all the way down. Then these are all vocal chunks, and then effects down here in the pink. All right, so that's generally how I lay things out. Sometimes I group them all together in a track stack. Sometimes I just leave them out just like this, spread out like this, whatever works for you. This kind of works for me at the moment. All right, so there are a number of ways that you can prepare your project to export or to take to another session. Okay, so the first option is this. If you're taking your project to another studio, maybe a friend or somewhere else, where you know for certain that they have got the same plugins as you, and we're talking about synth plugins as well as effects plugins, then this is what you do. You go through and you see that, like here, right here, we've got my first track is the kick track, and I've got the drum machine designer. Now the drum machine designer sits on top of Ultrabeat, and all of your drum samples sit within the Ultrabeat library. Okay, so when I'm saving, I need to make sure that the samples that are being triggered in this drum part will travel with the project. Okay, come to this one. Now I'm using the EXS24. Again, the EXS24 samples which sit on this computer need to also travel to the new studio, because they're not going to have the same samples. They might have the same synths, but they aren't going to have the same samples as you. All right, let's just go through this. EXS24, so sampler, more sampler. All right, this is just an audio, and these are audio sampler, audio sampler, and audio. Again, drum machine designer. We need to make sure that we carry those samples. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Come down here again, sampler, and this is audio. Right, so there's a lot more audio tracks here. And back to the sampler again, Silent One. Now this is a synth that I've got and might not be at the other studio, or let's assume it is at the other studio. Okay, so everything else is pretty much synths, and then we come down here to so we've got just audio files down here. Okay, great. So the other studio has got the same synth plugins and the same effects plugins as you. This is what you do. File, save as, and we're going to create a package. And in that package, we need to make sure that the Ultrabeat samples are selected. We also need to make sure that EXS24 samples and instruments are selected, as well as audio files. That way, when you pull up your project in the other studio, all of these will be imported as well. Finally, down here, if you're using anything from the Apple Loop library, you want to make sure this is selected, because sometimes the other studio might not have updated their sample library, their Apple Loop library, and you might have something newer and it won't be present. So that's not going to work for you. And as you can see, when I clicked that, the Space Designer Impulse Response box was checked as well, because some Apple loops have got their own reverb and other special effects settings. So that's automatically selected. All right. So just make sure you select all of those. You hit save, and that will create a Logic package for you that you can transport. All right. So let's cancel that for now. So that's the first option. Now, the second option is this. If, however, all you're going to do is take the project maybe to the other studio to record vocals, all right? So then you don't need to necessarily take the whole project as it is. What I'll probably do is export the drums as a group, the synths as a group, the bass as a group, and vocals, if I'm adding additional vocals and effects, I'll just export them as groups. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to click on this kick track here. I've already got all of my drums bussed to bus 10. Now, I have done a video on the importance of using group buses. I'll probably do another one sometime soon. So what's happening here is all of my drum tracks are being routed to this stereo pair over here. So all of my drums are coming through here. So let's just select this drum bus. So what I'll do now is I'll bounce down all of my drums. Before I do that, however, let's go to the master bus. So here's my main output channel, and I've got a few things on there. I'm going to switch these off. All right. I don't want them to be passing through these on my master bus. So let's just export that now. So it's going to simply be Command B to bounce. I'm going to bounce it out as a stereo wave file. So I'm going to call this Promise Drums and bounce that down. Okay, so now those drums are exported. Let's just create a new project. Don't close here. New audio file. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to import those drums. Promise drums, import those, import the tempo as well. Okay, so it's going to adjust the tempo. Right, so here are our drums. Okay, let's just play that back right there. Great, so there's our drums. So now let's look at the bass line. So once again, I'm going to solo the main bass. Okay, cool. It's got these effects on there. It's going through one of my favorite plugins, which is Alloy by Isotope. Okay, so I'm going to print the bass line with these effects on there, because this is just for me to take to another studio to lay some vocals down or to add some additional production. It's not necessarily for a mix. And what I'll do, I'll just go through, in fact, and I'll just select all of these bass elements actually. So I'm going to solo all of these. Yeah, so all of these are bass elements right here. So I'm soloing all of these. So I'm going to now export the bass lines as a group. I'm going to export the guitar. I think that's on its own. That's going through its own bus. And then I'm going to export all of my synths and vocals and effects, and then I'll put them all together and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've exported all of the groups. So I've got my drum group here, my bass group, keys, effects, and vocals, and these are all stems, okay? As you can see, everything starts at the same point and ends at the same point. All of these exports are exactly the same length, and that's important. It's important that you achieve that when you're exporting your stems. Let's just go back. As you can see here, I have created a cycle loop from bar 1 all the way up to bar 46. That means that all of my exports will start and finish at the same point. So right here, as you can see, I've got my drum group selected. When I export this, even though drums aren't playing at the very beginning, our stem will begin from bar 1. And the same goes for the vocals. When I export the vocal group, the same thing will happen. They will start at bar 1 and the stem will finish at bar 46. And that's how you achieve this. All of the stems being exactly the same length. If you don't follow that principle, you'll find things chopping off or not starting at the right place. Now, the reason I've exported the stems this way is to give me a bit more control wherever I'm going, because sometimes the musician or vocalist that's going to be adding additional recordings to this might find that maybe the bass is too loud. Now, if I was just working with just a 2-track stereo bounce of the whole song, I wouldn't really be able to go in and say mute the bass out, for example, or mute the drums, for example. So by exporting all of the elements or the groups like this, I have a lot more control in the studio as we're adding additional production elements. So this here would be my second option. Now let's look at a third option. So in this option, you might be sending off the project to have some additional production done. And rather than actually sending off like group stems, you might want to send the full project. However, the studio that the project is going to might not have, for example, Absynth. Okay. So what are you going to do here? I would suggest you export all of these tracks as stems, but keep all of the effects in place, apart from what's happening on the master bus. So this is the master. I'm going to switch off the effects here. And now I'm going to export all of these individual audio files. And to do that, you just come up here, you make sure that the end marker is not too far away. Let's bring it to about here. I'm keeping all of the effects, everything as is, because I've got Massive on here, I've got Absynth on here, and I'm using Isotope Nectar on some of these vocals. Like I said, the other studio might not have these plugins. I'm also using some of the Waves plugins on the drums. So I've got SSL channel strips here, and so on. Okay, so it will make sense for me to export all of these files and print the effects onto the exported files. Okay, so we just come up here to export, select all tracks as audio files, create a new folder, and I'm going to call this Promise Full Stems. You can call it whatever you like. If I was going to be taking this elsewhere to mix, then I'd export at 24-bit. If it's more for just additional production to be added and then coming back to me, then I'll stick to 16-bit because that will keep the file size down. However, 24-bit is sort of the standard that I'd use. I'm going to choose this, extend file length to end of project, AIFF. I'm not using any multi-output software instruments here, so that doesn't matter. I'm not going to bypass the effects because I want the effects plugins. I'm not going to include pan automation or volume automation. I can always do that later when I'm at the other studio. And I'm going to switch normalize to off. I'm not going to add the resulting files to project browser. And then once I hit export, all of the files will then be exported. I can then pull them back into Logic and they will sound pretty much as they did in this project right here. Okay. Okay, so now all of the files have been exported, all of the tracks have been exported, and as you can see, they're all right here. So all I'm going to do now is select one, then Command A to select all. I'm going to drag them and drop them into the project. All right, create new tracks. I'm going to select that and allow them to all come into my new Logic project. Okay, so as you can see here, the audio files have come in and Logic is building the overviews. You can see the activity up here and you can see the display coming up. I'm going to select all, Command A, and let's drag this back to bar 1. Okay, delete this one at the top. And this is a very big project. Okay, so once this is done building, I'll be able to play this back and have a listen, and we should be good to go. If there are any duplicates or if there's anything that I need to adjust, then I get in and adjust it. Now your volume faders will need to be adjusted to give you a nice balance in terms of your mix. But yeah, that should be ready to go. So that's another option you can use. Okay, now let's assume that you finished your mix, but maybe a record label is interested in the track and they want to do a remix, or you've got some sort of deal with them and they want the project to hand over to their engineers to do some additional production maybe, or to just do some mixing or whatever. They will give you their specific requirements, but generally speaking, they'd want the track exported without any additional effects. They want it pretty dry so they can apply their effects and processing to the project. So you now have to decide on what elements, such as effects, are actually integral to the sound that you have. So you might have a guitar part with its own effects on there. And if those effects actually bring the guitar part to life and you believe it's an integral part of the actual song, then I'd recommend you leave the effects on your guitar part and bounce two versions. So you'll duplicate the track like so, and you'd just copy that down there, which is Option, click, drag, drop. Okay, so I've got one with effects and one without. So I'm going to take these effects off and I'll leave these one with effects on. It will all make sense in a minute. Okay, so you kind of go through and you work out what elements need to have effects on, and what you probably want to do as well is remove all of your elements from the group buses. All right, so you want to send them back to stereo out. So all of these are going to be set back to stereo out. A quick way of doing this is if you go to the mixer, X on the keyboard, you highlight all of the elements like so. And if I was to just go like so and click on stereo out, all of these now are going to the stereo out. Okay. Now the reason for this is you want to send as clean a mix as possible to the label. The other thing I should suggest you do is make sure that you level up all of your channel faders. Now, don't forget, before you had your drums going through to a drum bus and they were being affected by different processing on the bus as well as on the actual channel strip. So what I'd suggest you do is go through, highlight everything and hold down the Option key and click on one of these faders. Now, as you can see, everything has been set and reset to unity gain, which is right here. Okay, so let's scroll through. There we are. Everything's at unity gain. Okay, X on the keyboard to come out of there. Like I said, you want to send as clean a mix as possible to the label. So you might want to go through as well and look at the pan pots. So what I'd want to do is I want to go through and reset the pan. Again, I'm going to hold down the Option key and click. Now think of it this way. Imagine you're the engineer at the record label waiting for the mix. Now you want to get a mix that's pretty open so that you can actually work your magic. Okay, so you think along those lines. Try and strip back some of the things that can be taken out. Reset the project in a way that will allow the other engineer room to be creative. Okay, now let's just listen to this kick drum right here and just make sure that we're okay with this kick drum. Okay, so there's still some headroom there, and this is what I'd actually do with all of the elements. What I'll do, let's just highlight, let's just cycle around this section. I'm just moving through all of the different tracks just to make sure that nothing is overloading. Okay, and that's what you do. You kind of go through and you just make sure that everything that's playing, that nothing is actually peaking, overloading, or clipping. Because when you export all of these files, you want them to be in pristine condition. Okay, so let's assume that we've gone through and we've checked everything. All of the levels are good and even. Nothing is clipping or overloading. We've removed all of the effects and processing that can be replaced without losing the essence of the track. And we're ready now to export all of these files. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the end marker here, and we're going to make sure sometimes the end marker is all the way down here. Okay, so you want to slide down and find that. And you want to grab that and you want to pull this into about, let's say about here, so we can catch the reverb tails. Okay. And now we come up to File, Export, and we're now going to export all tracks as audio files. Remember as well to label all of your tracks. You see down here, I've been a bit lazy down here and I haven't labeled these properly, but you want to make sure that everything is correctly labeled as well, that each track will actually make sense. You then come up here to export all tracks as audio files. I'm not going to trim silencers at the end. I'm going to extend file length to project end. So all of my files will run all the way to the end. Save as AIFF, and I'm going to export as 24-bit. Okay, so that's a higher resolution than 16-bit. Now, if you're using multi-output software instruments, so let's say, for example, you had the EXS24 and you had different sounds coming out on different outputs, because that's what you can do with some of these synths. In fact, all of these synths, if you're using Contact, if you're using battery or one of those, you can have within the synth itself, you can set up separate outputs. So you'd want one file per track. Okay, so let's say, for example, you had a kick drum coming out on output 1 and snare on output 2. This will give you separation. We're not going to bypass effect plugins because we've already removed all of the relevant ones that need to be removed. Are we going to include volume and pan automation? No, we're not. We're going to leave that as it is so the other engineer can play with that at their leisure. I'm going to switch off normalization completely. I'm not going to add the resulting files to the project browser. I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this Promise Audio Export. Create that folder. I'm cool with the rest. And as soon as I hit export, all of these files will then be exported into this folder. So let's do that now. Okay, so all of the files have been exported and they're sitting here in this folder. Now, as you can see, everything is exactly the same size in terms of file size, which means that they have exported properly in terms of the length. Okay, now I've got two options. I can import all of these files back into Logic and submit a Logic project, provided the studio or the label will accept that. So if I was to do that, I'll select all, Command A, and then I'll simply drag and drop back into Logic at bar 1. And I'm going to create new tracks. Okay, so here are all of the tracks, and so what you got to do is make sure you select all, make sure that everything is sitting at bar 1. Let's get rid of that. Whilst the overviews are building, it might take a little while to build, but once you play back, everything will actually flow smoothly and will be just right in terms of compliance for the label. Up here you can see the activity, all of the overviews of the tracks are building now. So let's listen to this one right here. Cool. And the project tempo, if you remember, was 116. So we set that up. Okay. And once this is done, I'll save this as a project package. So now I can send this off as a clean, dry mix without too much going on. Great stuff. I really do hope you found the video useful. If you did, drop me a line in the comment section, like the video and subscribe to the channel. This will really help me out. Now remember to support me at ducebeats.com as well as on my social media channels. And finally, switch on that notification bell so just like the rest of the MTTC squad, you will find out as soon as my next video drops. Until next time, I'm Dr. Duce. Peace.